partner would take and fix up and sell to homeowners or rent as affordable housing. The Housing Authority also has a little over $1 million in capital funds that it can use to renovate probably 30 to 35 of the homes and sell for affordable homeownership as a demonstration or pilot project. That's just an opportunity they have right now. But primarily it will be sell as is to the development community and development partners to then take to the next level.
Got it. Thanks.
In that same line, there was a list of like ideas that you could do with the Ford, like how they could renovate them or rent them out or sell them at a lower price on page 2 there. And I was just curious, it sounds like even with all of those ideas, none of those are in the ARPA money, right? Like those all come out of other funds, or they could come out of ARPA money. Okay.
There's choice and say an unusual level of flexibility there. We could ignore or put aside that the city could kind of reduce the price or hold back 20% of the down payment. And just ARPA funds could cover that. They could cover the renovation cost or cover down payment assistance. Or you can do both in a happy medium, and the ARPA funds could go further and kind of a balance. If that makes sense.
Band-aid at it. Doing work that's really necessary and then trying to sell them for affordable home ownership. One of our biggest concerns. Not necessarily, we can retain control through land use restrictions. And any thought of selling them for anything below appraised value requires a 30-year restriction by HUD. Okay, so I don't see a lot of developers are going to want to invest in a 30-year use restriction by HUD. And it makes it pretty impossible, not entirely impossible, in the home ownership realm. Because you sell to an affordable homeowner, if it resales and you have a 30-year restriction, it's your responsibility as the developer to ensure the next buyer qualifies. That gets really, really challenging.
Any other thoughts?
Just wondering, particularly in the Northeast area, what's the infrastructure like around there? Would there need to be some development to want to draw people there, developers there to invest in that community? That's just an example. And I just wonder what St. Louis did. I mean, that's a case study. Did you all go visit there? So did they do any kind of infrastructure improvements to make it, an incentive to want to develop in those areas?
That's a great question. And yes and no. It's really depended. In St. Louis, a lot of the neighborhoods, there are a lot of CDCs, community development corporations. And some neighborhoods, they've been able to fundraise and start to work on that infrastructure, kind of a strategic plan and investing in certain things in the neighborhood. In other places, it's either taken a really long time or has not happened. And it has not really been driven by the Affordable Housing Commission there. It's been more the community and the nonprofit community that is kind of driven things at that neighborhood level to help improve the infrastructure. Great question and great point on, like, it's not just the houses, and we got to look at the other community needs and assets over time and kind of start to think about how we can address those too.
Andy, I kind of have a thought, kind of a general question about, you talked earlier about a geographic focus. And I'm just wondering, well, one, I think it makes some sense, if not at least, saying or identifying particular neighborhoods, at least identifying criteria for what areas would qualify, because man, I mean, the central established area is still, a really big pot of housing to kind of just try and tackle. And then two, depending on those neighborhoods and the condition of housing stock in those neighborhoods, I feel like that will, that might change the conversation on, well, are renovation loans most appropriate? Is, credit counseling and support better there? Down payment assistance? I just feel like some of this is going to depend on the geographic area that we're targeting.
I was just curious, do we have any idea how much it would cost to fix some of those homes in that area? Has anybody done a study, a ballpark? I'd just be curious. I'm sorry? How much? Minimum? Okay. And if we fixed them up, which would make them more attractive, could the city not keep them? That was what I was trying to figure out. Okay, so the federal government is limiting the amount of money you can charge for rents. So then if we sell them, they can't be Section 8 houses either? They could. Okay, is there not a limit on the rent that could be charged? Okay. So the federal government is. Okay, so if we fixed them up, okay, another question, do you think they'll even sell at $50,000 a piece? Would somebody? Okay. Okay. Because I'm just trying to figure out why somebody would want to put their money on the line. If, like the question she asked, what's the incentive?
Like, I'm wondering if just like playing with the timeline, if there's amount of time to feel like how quickly they would sell, if there's like a, stopgap to say, okay, they're not selling, we need to invest them on our side because no one else is taking them. Is that a possibility in this plan somehow?
Thinking out loud a little bit, if the city were to go to RFP for some of the different clusters of homes that have 30 or 40 in a defined, some in, a few block area, they could set a limit to the RFP. If we have some of these other funds lined up and this ability to at least do some of them today, we're going to get some interest from a range of developers. There are some scattered ones that are trickier that I think the next option is really to go to auction, which there are probably some homes where that may be the easiest thing. some of the auction properties are really selling at market nowadays because of the limited supply, but yeah. Yeah. Good deal. Any other thoughts on kind of this overview and kind of piecing together all these different options before we actually look at the options? Oh, yeah, forgot. Getting ahead of myself. We wanted to quickly talk about what we mean by these different names. When we talk about a home repair program, talking about the range of about $5,000 to $25,000. Historically, and the city does have a home repair program, and a lot of cities do, and it's from, is it home or CDBG? CDBG funds. Too many acronyms. $5,000 isn't enough anymore, especially in some of the neighborhoods where there just hasn't been access to capital or things have deteriorated a little faster. We're talking about roofs, HVAC, plumbing, etc. And these are a grant or a forgivable loan, like after 5 years, for instance, it's forgivable. And a lot of these are homeowner focused. So they help people age in place, help people on fixed income stay in their home, continue to pay their mortgage, not worry about the conditions. It can cover anything from weatherization, ceiling, windows, insulating, etc., to doing those systems. And a lot of communities are looking at increasing that threshold from 5,000 to 25,000 because of the challenges in the older homes. So that's kind of a one segment. The next step up is the renovation and repair, which can be 25,000 and up. Typically, there's a limit set on the per unit amount of money that somebody can apply for in a grant or a trust fund. But typically the range is 25 to 80,000 from what we see. Again.
You get no what, Sal?
And is that through CDBG? So there is a home repair program, 0 interest. Okay. Right. 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 And is that geared to homeowners? Existing homeowners? And does the money? Really good background. So kind of, yeah.
Sure.
Right. And what we're seeing nationally on some of those programs that aren't like through a housing authority or with federal funds, they are typically, some are more geared toward preservation. So they're geared toward developers to use as that last piece of financing that could be soft second or third that's payable after everything else. So it's not, the grants are kind of out of vogue in some areas because there is, in terms of trust funds, there's a desire to have revolving funds to keep putting money into a community, but there also still are some forgivable loans or liens and grants as well. Grants tend to go more toward the services and some things like that, or down payment assistance. They're not using like, okay. Byron asked if we're seeing communities use the grant funds in that way. Are you meaning the grants from HUD? Okay. Okay. So with federal grant funds, we don't see those used as grants a lot. We see those used more as weatherization or maybe infrastructure and neighborhood like that. So they go more toward home repair and the smaller size and maybe a grant there. What I was talking about more is an affordable housing fund, which gets money. A lot of them, there's philanthropy funds as well. They may give out some of the funds as a grant. So it's more the use of the money they get, which is typically not CDBG or home. It's typically some, like, the city puts some money in it from the general fund and then philanthropy matches or something like that. So it's a little bit more flexible than the HUD dollars. Right.
Yeah. And it's a matter of, I think, some of those requirements from the regulations, as well as so the funds from, say, city, GO or philanthropy or utilities, we see sometimes, putting into that affordable housing fund mix, obviously are less encumbered, to your point. And then I think also scaled sometimes much bigger. And so those larger grant amounts that, they're just larger funds and are able to absorb kind of a $40,000 or $50,000 grant versus the loan where you might want to revolve that. I'd say even still, though, a lot of times we're seeing that as still some mechanism, or at least a balance of those funds is still revolving loan fund in some way to get the money back in to perpetuate the program in general. So I'd say even still, it's only there's only a sliver of grants out of that, from that, once it's gone kind of mentality.
Shied away from the loan side. Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
That's right.
Right. It's a historic structure. Yeah. The question was for like philanthropy funds that put money into a affordable housing endeavor. Are they put in and asked to be a revolving fund? Uh-huh. Right. That's been part of the conversation in Omaha as they're working to launch some pretty substantial efforts that are seeded by philanthropy. And in Tulsa, and I'm trying to remember the distinction in Tulsa between the city dollars and the philanthropy dollars that seeded that fund. I'm not remembering right now, but yeah. Philanthropy, especially from what we've seen, has been driving that. Let's figure out a way to revolve it. Maybe it goes from we give $1 million and in 10 years we get 800,000 back, but at least we get something back, yeah. It's a great question though. The third category is, we call it homeowner services, and this really is about preparing people to either figure out if they can or should be homeowners, to get credit ready and understand all the responsibilities that I need to be reminded about as a homeowner. And so financial credit counseling, home buyer education, homeowner education, home repair training. Sometimes there's like tool rental programs, down payment assistance, somehow covering PMI. So you might be able to buy a little bit higher priced house and still have it be affordable. And a lot of times these are grants to nonprofits operating grants to provide these services. And we heard that this was an important mix if we're talking about homeownership. And that's why we include it here and include it in the options. And I just wanted to, but when we say homeowner services, we do include like the down payment or closing cost assistance as well. Oh, right. Clicker. So we did it. Are there any more thoughts or questions on those three distinctions?
Hold on. I just want to get to my notes page.
And we are seeing in the work we're doing, and as we've talked to some of the funds, there is a lot of emphasis on, you could call it innovation or layering different funds or just thinking about housing in a different way. A lot of people are turned off by grants, particularly if they are that rehab level, because the funds don't go very far, then they're gone, and then you don't see what happens from there usually. So there's a lot of work toward that more holistic approach that has, the homeownership programs in another piece, all with the aim of not just doing the housing, but providing the supports that help people succeed and provide avenues that are kind of mutually beneficial. If, a new homeowner, a few years in can't do it anymore, there may be some workarounds to prevent foreclosure or, other things like that. think we're ready to get into the options. And so last time, we had some really good conversation, but we talked through a lot of information. And what we left it as is, we could use some concrete examples of what this could look like so that we can make some sort of recommendation or at least work toward that. And so we, click on the screen. We came up with 3 options that are a little bit different, but we think capture the priorities that came out of this group in our conversations. And the first is focused on single family home ownership. The second adds a little bit of emphasis on improving quality rental options. And the third one mixes in some infill new construction. And so the first option, and we just picked these ratios for conversation to start somewhere. 40% of the $5 million would go toward the rehabs, 40% towards home repair, and then 20% to help with those homeowner services to prepare people who may buy a renovated home to succeed. This would really target the 50 to 80% AMI level. And mainly for existing homeowners, we could get below that for people on fixed incomes who just need some improvements to their home to stay there another 5-10 years. But otherwise, it'll be 50 to 80%, probably skewed a little toward the higher end of that because we're talking about home ownership. The rough calculation of the impact of this, 40 existing homes would be renovated. 130 homeowners could be helped through home repair. And then another 100 households would be helped through services like the down payment assistance and counseling and so forth, which could be some of those people who buy the renovated homes. Oh, keep forgetting I have this.
Waiting on me to advance it.
Yeah, giving Justin the advanced look. The second option, so we reduce the renovation and home repair percentages down to 20% each, then 40% to renovation and rehab for rentals. And then we kept the homeowner services, which could also be tenant services as well. This would, because we're talking about rental as well, could reduce or widen the affordability range from 30% to 80% of AMI. Again, still through the home repair, help existing homeowners. And the impact would be about 25 existing homes. Could help 65 homeowners with home repair, serve 100 households through the services, and support the renovation of up to 50 homes. And you could see this being an approach in a specific geography. You can help the rental and home ownership if that is something that's desired. And then I did it again. Looking at Justin. The third one is working in, let's put 40. It didn't right here. I didn't change the third column. It's the same numbers, but the 40% here is supposed to be for new construction. It will be on the, you clicked off the screen.
Sorry about that.
There you go.
There it is.
So 40% would be new construction. Sorry about the confusion there. Again, this would be 50 to 80% affordability, skewed a little bit higher because of the new construction and homeownership focus. This would impact, you could build about 20 new single family homes, renovate 25 existing homes, and then you can see the kind of home repair and homeowner services impact there. So this is kind of a lot of information. We thought about how to put it up here, foster a discussion. We also talked about some of the trade-offs in the memo, kind of wanted to think through what challenges that we've been talking about would be addressed. What boxes does this check that are priorities for this group and for the community and for the city. What are some of the trade-offs? You know, what are we not doing by doing this approach that we could do as funds come back through the Housing Authority home sales? And then key elements for success to start thinking about, okay, once we figure out what we're going to do, how do we do this well?
Yeah. And I think, you know, kind of this slide really does, I think, generally summarize, you know, some of those challenges that we're trying to address and the trade-offs that we're going to have. You know, I think as we're thinking about these options or what blend of these options might be, you know, I think there's a sense of how many homes are we impacting? You know, certainly scenario one being homeowner focused and, you know, as we move down, you know, through the options, the numbers, the overall numbers of units being touched goes down in some instances because the cost is going up per unit on some of them. The third one has a new construction component, right? And so, you know, option two is the option that we just, as Andy said, we're just kind of putting these together to think through the different possibilities. But, you know, option two is the option that includes the renter component, which allows you to have a broader affordability range. It gets you down to that 30% AMI. I think it'll be interesting as we talk about this, you know, that as I'm looking at this and I kind of scribbled some notes here, you know, 120 to 180 homes for option one, 110 to 140 for option two, 80 to 115 units, just sort of given the range of costs. So the amount of units that get touched are different. But then also, if you recall what we said at the very beginning, you know, that whole bottom line of the ecosystem and what's possible. And, you know, I think that's part of striking this balance is I don't think we should just be looking at the number of units and saying, well, these units go down, you know, the number of units we can serve goes down. And maybe, you know, is that our focus, or is it also the AMI, or is it also thinking about the ecosystem and who's actually going to help us get these improvements done, whether we're talking 80 units or 140 units.
And so yes, Scott. Scott asked about the cost. All are based on having $5 million for the ARPA funds and what we can do with that. The cost, I do have summarized in the memo, you know, rehab was $40,000 to $50,000 a unit. Home repair was $15,000 to $25,000 a unit. New construction was, wait for it.
80 to 100.
$80,000 to $100,000 per unit, trying to reflect current trends and costs. And this is for the total gap. And then homeowner services, because we're talking about down payment assistance and closing costs, not just, you know, counseling and so forth, but $10,000 per household. So we did kind of use those costs that we estimated in the feasibility examples we talked through last time to kind of give a realistic target.
Yeah, the question was whether or not option one would allow us to target, to do pilots in targeted neighborhoods. And then what was sort of the other side of that then, Bob? Just, oh, and then if we did that. Surrounding them. Yeah, and targeting that and leveraging those, you know, funds from option one in neighborhoods with the public housing properties where you could be doing both as a pilot project.
Yes, I think that there's definitely a way to do that with option one. Jason. We haven't done that yet. We can add that. Yeah.
Say that again, Sally. Oh.
Right. Right, and the two questions were, did we calculate like property tax return or return on investment for the different scenarios? And the answer is no, we didn't for this conversation, but we can add that when we follow up kind of the recommendations memo draft. And the second question was, what's really the impact of new construction, given that it costs so much more to produce a unit today, especially where the value isn't nearly what it costs some of the areas.
And I mean, one of the things Andy and I talked about as we were developing the options here is, we don't really see any of these as sort of a straw man that we would just say like, this isn't done. I mean, there are definitely trade-offs. And I think you're touching on one of them that I think makes option 3 challenging, but I also think that there is a notion of, if you want to do new construction infill, which is something that we've talked about over the weeks and months, that's what that might look like. And then we just felt like we had to acknowledge what that looks like. And does it make it less appealing, or I don't even want to say it that way. I don't want to prejudge it, but I mean, it just creates a different scenario that recognizes maybe new construction infill is something that, is a laudable goal, but it's going to have an impact on how far the ARPA funds go, where you might want to do them, how you package that pilot project. And so, definitely those are the right kind of questions and observations, I think, when you're looking at these, especially that new construction one. And I think that point is the point I was trying to make when we first started, when we're looking at all of this, to think about what our recommendation for the ARPA funds are, to recognize that we may have other goals that we want, or even ways to leverage other opportunities that may not be about the 5, those funds. And I think that's an example of that point where you might be looking at that for a phase 2. Perhaps. Sorry, I'm trying to get to theirs.
Andy?
Yes.
Yeah. So Scott said something in the chat, and I kind of wanted to piggyback off of that anyway. He asked about the 50 rental units in option 2, and clarifying whether those are rehabs or new construction. I think in option 2, we're just talking about rehabs. I believe, if I'm not mistaken. You can correct me if I'm wrong there, but the other thing I wanted to just kind of jump on that is, I believe in that option 2, there were about 75 units, 25 from ownership, single family ownership, and 50 from the rental units. And I believe from the scenarios we talked about last time we met, I think that those 75 units would that would be able to include the amount of housing authority homes that we have there at the 2 pilot projects that you mentioned at Pyatt and the one down at Meridian. So I think having that rental option is important. I mean, we talked about in the very first meeting that renters are disproportionately affected by are disproportionately housing burdened. So, you know, for me, I know we're hoping that we'll have other funds in the future and other opportunities to address it. But if we're not starting out on the right foot and setting a precedence for, you know, helping support renters as well with this initial, you know, capital injection, then I think that would be unfairly biased towards home ownership. Although I do think that over the long term should be certainly a priority.
Thank you, Paul. The 50 rental units, I'm trying to remember the question there. What you said was correct. Those, and the numbers are based on renovating the single family homes as rental versus doing multifamily. All the, you know, based on what we heard was, you know, using the single family portfolios that we have as much as we can for this purpose. So we kept the options too.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think Tony has a question.
Well, my first question is going to be, can anybody hear me? Did I get my microphone fixed or not?
You did. We can hear you.
Okay, good. I just want to talk about, we've talked about whether we should target a certain neighborhood or do this or that, but my feeling is that we need to pick the area, you know, east of I-35 and central 13th, 21st and rehab that area. And the reason is that we have to create some pride in ownership to get these things rolling. And if everyone knows that, you know, a lot of this money is going to be put toward that neighborhood, and it's not to say we can't do it citywide and other places case by case, but if the whole goal is to renovate this neighborhood and get affordable housing, then people will either have to get on board or get out. And another reason is that's where a lot of the lots are, the empty lots that we need to use up, and probably, hopefully, some of them or a lot of them will end up in the land bank. And so the other thing I'll point out is I'm not quite sure how we're going to run all this thing, but we already have people that know how to do this. You got Mennonite Housing, you got Residential Housing Solutions, you got Habitat for Humanity. The common thread of all of those nonprofits is they don't have enough money to do what they want to do. I mean, they could do a lot more if they had money. I don't know if we can, you know, help them, partner with them or what, but they're set up to do this already. And they'll bring you the owners, they'll train them what they need to be. So my suggestion is to kind of target our area and maybe partnership up with the people that know how to do this, and they can take care of the new home construction while we work on rehabs and renovations and stuff like that. That's my comments.
Catch the targeting locations. Tony, you want to say where you just threw out sort of a east of this, north of that kind of thing, and I just missed it.
East of 135.
Most of the empty lots are going to be east of I-35 over to Hillside probably, and then between Central and 21st or 27th up in there. There's James Arbertha used to tell me he thought there was 1,000 empty lots in there, which there could be. That's a lot of them get condemned and torn down, and then they sit there with the trees growing and they just become an eyesore. So that's the area I think we ought to target.
Great, thank you.
And that's the area that Habitat has just built 50 homes in the last, what, 5 years, something like that. So now they could build 15 houses a year every year if they had the funding to do it. But you know, they exist on donations and volunteers and things like that. So I mean, they alone could, in one of these scenarios you were talking about building 25 new homes, they alone could do that. and put 25 homeowners in the neighborhood immediately. So
Excellent. Thank you.
I'm thinking about how to repeat it. I should have just walked over here. Oh boy. Well, it's how do we pick where to focus in an equitable way, but also not do too much in one area too fast to cause wide scale displacement. And is part of the question in phase 3 to have some anti-displacement funds, which is another discussion of what those could be and what's acceptable.
It's a great point though, right? I mean, yeah, you can't, we could say all 80 units right here or something, but not thinking of what that impact could be to the existing home neighborhood, the rest of the neighborhood is a great point. Just so you know, I didn't know if you wanted me to.
That's kind of the next set of questions. Perhaps another conversation depending on how this goes, but yes, that's very important. Application process, how that set up was part of the question.
Would landlord incentives go in that same discussion?
Right. The question was, would option 2 also need to include landlord incentives, and how would we have landlords into the discussion? Because we're talking about renters, and that's a very good point. It should be, I think, and I appreciate that being brought up. I think another question on option 2 is how are we going to monitor? How do we, one thing I didn't do was take out administrative costs from the $5 million because there will be some to staff and set up and administer funds. But also, if we're talking about monitoring, can we piggyback stuff Sally's department is already doing? Then Sally's comment was that we do have some systems in place for Section 8 units and also for home funds. This has actually been a really big point of conversation in both Tulsa and Omaha as we've worked with them. Tulsa's still trying to figure it out. Like, how do we monitor annually how do we make it not as arduous as tax credit monitoring? Unless there's already tax credits as part of the deal, then it's taken care of. It does get a bit complicated. In Omaha, it was, some of the conversation is, the state has monitoring services already in place. Can we piggyback off of that? How do we deal with landlords who aren't familiar with all the tax credit rules for monitoring? That is a consideration. Can that be tackled in the ARPA timeline? Do we want to add a little bit more complexity there? Okay. And Sally just said they do have a rental rehab program through CDBG, zero interest loans, low interest loans, no takers for that as well. So it's either a different design or maybe this idea sounds better than it actually is. I think in terms of rental redevelopment, the other thing we were thinking about was, and in the examples we walked through last week, the cost per unit gap was $50,000, $60,000 a unit to convert a part of the housing authority homes into like a rental housing portfolio. And part of that was because we held the rents at 60% of AMI to say that'd be affordable. So to really do that project, you need tax credits or something else to want to try to use ARPA funds there because they wouldn't stretch very far. And then that would help with monitoring, but it would also pretty much take one of those projects out of the ARPA fund timeline because probably just getting to a tax credit application would be pushing the 2-year time frame, let alone getting the allocation and everything else. So I'm curious, is there another way to address rental housing in option 2 then? Because we've talked through some of the complexities. We've also talked about the, to Paul's point, it really quality, stable rental housing is a need in our community. Project-based vouchers are probably the most viable option to do it in the time frame that we're talking about. The question was if there are other nonprofit partners that do rental housing that would take on a project like that. Right. Sally mentioned the International Rescue Committee that works with a lot of immigrant families that may be able to use the 5 or 6 bedroom homes. We were talking about needing to remove the walls to make some of those marketable because there are some smaller bedrooms, but maybe that's a way to lower the cost needed to renovate those, and they could be used using less renovation funds, basically. So are there any feelings on which option you prefer? Is there a different mix we need to look at? Or is there a comfort level moving forward with a preferred option? Scott?
Yeah, I don't see those, just so you know. So let me know when you do see them, Scott. Yeah. All right, Paul said I have to jump off. My final thought, geographic focus on redlined and or environmentally degraded areas, wastewater treatment facilities, brownfields, et cetera. Let's not leave out renters in the initial allocation of the ARPA funds. Not everyone is ready for home ownership, especially 30 to 50% AMI. Those folks are living in very poor conditions, and getting them into healthy housing should be a focus. I think a new construction prices are too volatile right now, and the impact not immediate enough for what's intended by these funds. We have about 400 Afghan refugees coming to Wichita over the next few months, just as a reminder, and some of those might be larger families, going back to what Sally and Andy were just saying. So thank you, Paul. And I think that's a great way to kind of kick off what Andy was just asking. And those are the kinds of considerations we're talking about right now.
Are going to be building affordable home ownership. There's a caveat in the contract that says if you don't sell it within 9 months of construction, it has to convert to rental housing. Because you don't want it just sitting there on the open market not being used. And so I just caution, as we come up with a program, I think you need to come up with one that's flexible enough to, I always tell the staff, don't paint yourself in a corner, right? To say we're not doing any rental, or we're only doing 25 rentals, right? You need to leave yourself the flexibility to be able to respond to conditions. And it's just something that I think we should keep in our mind, because I do think we're going to be challenged in finding even 80 to 130, homeowner ready folks. And what's the plan if you can't?
The thoughts I've kind of heard that maybe option 3 could be cut in new construction as part of this initial allocation. Is there any heartburn there? Sorry.
I mean, we do a lot of construction, and to Tony's point, there is an opportunity there to continue to do what's already set up, and that process is set up. I would say that if we were to, and when I say we, I'm not just talking Mennonite Housing. There's others that do this, and I do believe there's still a lot more that can be done with new construction. If that did increase, if it increased there, there'd have to be a discussion about the kind of on the administrative side, whether that would pose too many, pressures on like the city's ability process. So there's already some where, it takes a little while to process all the applications and so forth. So that would be a consideration on the administrative side to handle that. But there is still need. It's just if the committee decides that, yeah, it's higher cost, but I know we see more demand. We as Mennonite Housing could do more. I'm sure has many potential home buyers there and others. On the flip side, home repair, we're not even scratching the surface of what can be done with home repair. So from our standpoint, really any of those options I think are going to be available. I would suggest though, if we seriously look at option one, single family home ownership, making the distinction between rehab and home repair, say 40 and 40, instead of just saying, well, let's split it 50-50, we could say, well, let's hold 20% for home ownership services and let demand drive, whether it's home ownership or rehab. Where does the demand show? So I have a little bit of, I guess, heartburn with making that arbitrary determination 40-40 if all of a sudden you find there's a lot more demand for one versus the other. I don't know. I don't want to go across the board. I know we're trying to decide which one, but I do agree with the comments about if you do the rental, now you're bringing it down to the 30% and you address that. So I can see advantages to all those, and but I do have a little heartburn with just walking away from the new construction.
So before you give up the mic, I got a question for you. So from the standpoint of this is the first 5 million, and we're talking about a longer program, I guess I'm wondering what your reaction would be to saying, you know what, part of this, I mean, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, but I mean, I think there's also room for us. Well, no, I think actually it makes a lot of sense for us to also capture the conversation that we're having here, knowing that we've got a short term and a medium term and a long term, kind of mindset to this, to be able to say whether or not it's an official recommendation, quote unquote, or if it's just, here are policy considerations we should be thinking about moving forward. Maybe part of the consensus is there's, maybe part of the consensus is as a group, we think infill new construction is important, but not with this 5 million. And I just want to get your reaction to that, because I just want to keep everybody in mind that we have to make a recommendation on the ARPA funds, but I think we could also capture the conversation and make recommendations, or at least broad policy recommendations.
No, that's an excellent point. I agree with that. I think that as long as we don't lose sight of the new construction, I could definitely understand, well, that's part of the longer term vision. If we decide we want to start with something else here initially, sure. Definitely, yeah. We'll do our 4 or 5 houses a year. And we could just to put in a plug, we could do 3 times that many. There's the need and we have the capacity. So
well, and I think that's part of, I think that long-term vision is, it's how much of that 5 million could be used, if we're using it for new construction and it's taking away from that first 5 million, but if we know it's part of a longer package and we're building the capacity, the partnerships in the ecosystem to do that, you could really take advantage of a new construction program that has more resources, has more partnerships, has more of that capacity built in, more so than maybe we have right now. Thank you. How will we get rid of all of the empty lots? So that's a question about, empty lots, and I think that's tied to the new construction infill kind of conversation, right? I mean, is that, and the land bank, yep. And so, is that something that we should be considering with the $5 million ARPA funds?
We tried to scout out empty lots in our neighborhood, and owners are not necessarily like begging to sell those. For one reason or another, they want to hold on to them. So it's not like they're just like empty lots means they're free game. It's so that's one piece. The other thing I wanted to add was, like, in our neighborhood, I could imagine our group facilitating, and I think, like Empower Evergreen would be another one, like a neighborhood request where the neighborhood saying, hey, we've scouted out people for you who want to participate in this way. And then the neighborhood is saying, here's how we want you to spend the money, instead of us saying, hey, neighborhood, you got to do it this way. And so I would be open, as a nonprofit leader, to say, hey, give me 2 months to put together what people actually want in my neighborhood and come to you and say, we got 10 who want to do home repair and 10 who want to do rehab, and they're all in that same area. So
Thank you. Any other thoughts about a recommendation, or do you need something else to help get there that we could follow up with, or you want us to ask you in a week with a poll or something like that?
You'll take our recommendations to the city council, right? City manager. And then we're going to look at going out into the communities to find out what the people want. What if they say something different to what is proposed? What do we do then? What will happen after that?
I'm looking.
I think that's the nature of public government, making civic decisions, right? And you've got to have some place to start. And we're really fortunate that you all are here helping to share your insights and knowledge and volunteer your time towards that. And so then but that's not the end of the conversation. That's the start of the conversation. So I don't know, I guess I won't speculate beyond that, but that is a possibility that would happen. Sure. But I think the benefit that we have from this conversation is that we have the reasoning and the rationale and the background of the information that we can share with people to say, these are some of the factors that were considered. These were some of the experts in the population of Wichita who were there, and they came to. So I think that's very helpful for members of the public when they hear and see that.
And yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be at that next phase, definitely an education component, really concisely and clearly laying out the benefits, the costs, the trade-offs that we're talking about here this afternoon, and making that clear. When I think about your question, I think it would be, kind of like if we chose option one and there's no renter option and we show that it's that 50 to 80 and maybe leans more towards the 80 because it's homeowner, and then getting a reaction to that, I could imagine that kind of thing. As I'm hearing the conversation right now, and maybe we're not there, maybe I'm presuming a little bit just on what I'm hearing, but Paul's comments that I grabbed right away, and what I feel like I'm hearing here is if we're at option two and it includes renters and owners and a broader spectrum, but maybe we're not locking it into a percentage, and we're letting neighborhoods perhaps help us identify what those opportunities are, and building in some flexibility that right now don't exist in the scenarios because we just put it out there for discussion. I would like to think that you'd get at least people recognizing that I feel like had a really good, robust conversation. We covered a lot of the bases, and we're putting something there that would be reflective of the need, and that they'd be able to sort of see themselves as as someone who might be able to take advantage of some of this opportunity that might be out there in front of them. Yeah, that's another great plus. I mean, that's the other part of, I think, the education piece too, which goes back to say, there is a recommendation here around ARPA funds that is part of a package of opportunities that we have in the next however many years we want to define, whatever we want to define, short and midterm, are, and being able to lay that out. I think that's just part of the education and the messaging that would be required. And absolutely, we can't lose sight to some of the comments we've had just here in the end. We can't lose sight of we've got a long play here. We're talking about one thing right now, but we've got a long play, and we're actually within these conversations and looking at what these different opportunities are, putting together a fairly cohesive strategy, I think, at least in that midterm, to be able to say, as the market changes, or as whatever changes, maybe new construction becomes something, or maybe there's a new opportunity that is the land bank and vacant lots and other things that suddenly make infill, you know, an infill strategy more viable that we aren't necessarily considering now because of current conditions. I think that's part of the messaging for sure.
And one of the things that was recently mentioned was having those hard lines, like we are earmarking $2 million for this. I appreciate the comment that maybe that's not the best approach. One of the things we're seeing in all of the funds we've studied and worked with is they launch a program or an idea and have to pivot. There was a green lining fund in Detroit, which is offering second mortgages in historic red line areas to help homeowners do repairs where they, you know, and help improve the appraisal gap in those neighborhoods. But they were raising $50 million and had trouble spending $10 million because the situation righted itself in some of the neighborhoods in Detroit. And there were able to be market loans instead of loans with this guaranteed second. So they've kind of pivoted, and the program may actually go away because it's done what it was intended to do there. So there is a need to build in and you know, be ready to learn things quickly and pivot and have that latitude. And one thing I'll say is we had this meeting going until 6, and we're past that. And you know, I sense a need to follow up, and maybe we process this and write a draft recommendation and send it to you all to reflect on. So I do want to ask, do we need another session and discussion to get to that recommendation and to get to, you know, we think it should be done this way. We're hearing a lot of key points there right now, but I just want to ask those questions. It's hard to get to a decision here because the opportunity is great and there's so many options and there's always a trade-off, and we definitely understand that.
Well, here's another thing, Andy. I think one of the things we could also do is just take this conversation, and I mean, I'd love to just right now just get I mean, if, you know, what does everyone think? And I'm just, again, just for the sake of kind of getting us to a consensus, what does everyone think about option number 2 that includes a rental option? You know, don't worry about the percentages right now. I think we would be crafting whatever this thing is to, I'm hearing right now to not even have a fixed percentage. And so, I mean, I think there's ways for us to kind of build consensus. And so I want to just sort of say, are we saying that option 2 that has a renter and a homeowner component and has a rehab and a renovation component allows us to have a broader AMI, range served. Maybe a fewer homes are served with that versus option 1, but maybe that is reflective of our capacity now anyway over the next 4 years. 5 years. So I don't know what you and Scott just said, but I just feel like we could kind of get ourselves to even something to where we could say a modified something 2, or at least maybe a more fleshed out option 2 kind of thing to put back in front of you might be at least a way we could conclude tonight, but maybe that's not where we're going. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think that's what, I mean, part of it. So I think that's exactly that. And I think it's a matter of what does the option itself look like? And then what's the narrative around that option? And I think that's part of it isn't, this option is not going to just exist on its own. I think there's it's wrapped around the three different sort of funds, the home ARPA and the, you know, the housing authority properties is sort of, these are the opportunities. We're talking about a longer term. So there's a time frame component we can, you know, and so it's almost like you stick that in the middle of this conversation. I guess one of the questions I had, and you know, for Andy and maybe Scott and others, is the reason I said I might get in trouble here is because I don't know if we were charged with also making broader policy recommendations like that. But it sounds like maybe we are, Scott, at least in the context of, you know, here's the ARPA funds, here's what that programming of that $5 million could look like, but we're also, I think, building consensus around what that looks like, understanding some other things that I'm not sure we were necessarily charged with doing. And I just wanted to throw that out there like that. Because I think we might reach a different consensus if we're not able to talk about new construction in another way. Yeah. Sure.
I think there is the freedom to say we as a group arrived at this recommendation and are furthermore recommending that you strongly consider single family construction in the future in additional phases. I think there's certainly that freedom.
Okay.
Because
great.
All you're doing is providing a recommendation regardless.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I second that. I agree with not making, and we're not saying there's a commitment construction, but as long as there's an opportunity for further discussion and it's not, we're not walking away from that. Yeah, but this too, you know, sounds like a good way. Affordable housing fund with the initial 5 million.
I think that's our microphone's way of saying we're over time, isn't it? I don't
Well,
know.
I mean, I guess one thing I would just do real quick is just a quick show of hands of people. I mean, is what you heard Justin say back, does that resonate with you? Does that reflect where you are in the conversation right now? With the understanding, you can certainly change that if you want to, but.
Is that what you would like to see, I think, is our next step to package something like an option 2 with a little bit more narrative and you know, and maybe some flexibility and some just reflecting the conversation, but to start with that as the basis.
Really, I think it's, can you live with this option at the end of the day?
Seeing some nodding heads.
No, any no's out there or further conversation?
Oh, uh-oh. All right. Tony, you want to say, chime in and let's hear it, because I definitely want to know what could we do to that to help reflect what you'd like to see.
I just like to see the new construction as part of it, because I think that's particularly on the time frame you have. I said before, I don't know how we're going to run this. I don't know, is this going to be run out of City Hall or out of a strip mall office, or who's making the decisions, who's handing out the money, et cetera, et cetera. So it's going to take a long time to get this going, and you've already got people ready to go. I just think you ought to look at new construction right off the bat.
So yeah, there is a question there about how quickly can this be operationalized, to use a fancy word, and who's going to do it. I think the intent going into this is that it would be run out of the city initially to launch it and get it established. And if it grows, their conversation down the road. That's absolutely true. Sally, does your department have the capacity to add a program today? So it's a very important distinction, Tony, and is we have the expertise.
Yeah.
Right. Have to add a staff member.
Yeah, and I'm wondering though also, like, if we did something like that, I mean, it's interesting because we didn't in option 3 include a rental piece, and so I don't know what, you know. Here's a question for the new construction side is also, in my mind, if we were to include some sort of new construction component, given kind of where I feel the rest of the room had been, is it possible to make that significantly smaller in this first wave to where we might only be including enough funds for 10 new units, which is 10 more additional. Like this is not replaced. Like I'm also understanding that this is not, these are not infill units and new construction units that are suddenly being built with these funds that are, that could have already been built. These would be additional. And so, you know, I heard you say that you would have capacity to do more, but maybe in this first realm, rather than saying 20 to 25 homes, we are saying that we price it at a point where it might only be, you know, 8 to 10 homes on that new construction side. Again, because we want to try, I've heard several of you kind of nodding your heads, heard you nodding your heads, but you know, I've seen you nodding your heads around the rental piece and the broader AMI part of that conversation. And so if we're trying to strike that balance, you know, is well, and that's right. And I'm also thinking about the conversation we had last meeting. I think it was last meeting, you know, where we were talking about not the capacity side, the pool side, and being able to say how many homeowners, how many new homeowners are out there being able to serve with the services to get them to home ownership. And there is still new home ownership opportunities with number 2. And so if I don't know, I remember, I think it was Sally and another woman that was saying, and I was online, so I can't remember exactly, but was saying that we have a challenge of even trying to get qualified home buyers. And so I don't know if that's worth factoring in again into the initial $5 million piece or not. I don't know if that's part of it. Okay. So, well, okay. And that's, I guess that's why I mentioned the number is like, maybe we would be smaller. And yeah, I think that's fair. And so for the sake of time, and I could continue to try to facilitate us to a consensus, but it sounds like are we going to put a kind of a hybrid reflect what we've done here scenario, Andy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's his way of telling me to just stop talking. He's got this. We'll put something in front of you.
Yes. So we have some work to do to create this preferred option with some more description, reflecting back what we've heard today, to get to you all in the next week for your thought and comments. And I just want to say thank you so much again for your commitment to this group and the great conversations we've had around kind of focusing this opportunity for maximum impact. And I know there's a lot of work still to be done, but this is a very good start. And I think we've made a lot of progress with a ton of information in a short amount of time, and we will keep working. And so with that, I do need to open it up for, is there any public comment? Not to call out one person, but you're the last non-committee member. Or any public comment? Okay.
Tony, thanks for committing to join us online. Appreciate it. And thank you all for your time here in person. I think it's a great conversation, and it's very challenging, and we're trying to, you know, triangulate something that, you know, has a lot of moving parts. And I think we'll be able to do that and reflect, you know, I think something that hopefully will look like it represents what kind of everybody was talking about here today, and we'll see how we can do with that. And thanks for your time. Sorry we went a little over. Thanks, Tony. I can't control the recording, Scott.